If you accept that freedom of expression is an important value in this country and internationally, then you accept that there are mistakes, that there are people who abuse that right, and you deal with that in a separate context, but you don't deal with it by limiting freedom of expression. Azerbaijan has a history of intolerance towards critical media and critical expression. Exactly what tipped the balance now is hard to know precisely, but clearly there's a crackdown underway. Azerbaijan has become the leading jailer of journalists in Europe. It's becoming a more closed society. They've tried to have it both ways. They've tried to present a sort of more open vision to the world while they've cracked down domestically, but that contradiction is being exposed because their domestic crackdown, particularly on the media, has become so open and so blatant. I think Azerbaijan is, again, trying to have it both ways, looking for international legitimacy while it cracks down on domestic dissent. And I think the international community can't allow that to happen. They have to pay a price. They have to pay a price in terms of their international standing for these repressive policies. That's what the international community needs to insist on. So what are the threats? I mean, first, I think the fundamental reason that we're seeing this spike in numbers, this increase in risk, is because the power dynamic has shifted. The relationship that journalists have with the individuals and institutions and governments that they cover. It really was the power of the press in many circumstances that provided a certain level of protection. And one way of thinking about this is, when journalists used to go out into conflict zones, they would put press on their car, or they'd wear a vest that identified them as journalists. And in many places around the world, that's laughable. Or think about when you were a journalist and you would get into a bit of trouble, and you might tell the people who were detaining you, whether it was a military base, or if I had this experience in working in Central America, or some rebel group, you might say, listen, if you detain me, there will be no one to tell your story. Well, that's also laughable. I mean, because they have many ways of communicating. So what we're seeing is, in many parts of the world, the information monopoly that journalists once possessed that gave them this safety has evaporated. And so journalists themselves are much more vulnerable. There's been a new strategy of repression that has emerged in this environment. I call these folks the demonstrators.